You're still at main campus.
No, I think I officially left like I'm now working on examiners.
It's okay. Anything not happened.
Okay.
Guaranteed. There's one thing that's guaranteed.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
no wonder. You had a teaser. Yeah. He was also your supervisor. Sure. He's still lecturing.
If he's unhappy, it's throws it back if you go your work this summer when you read fed.
Wow.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, those who are here, panel, as well as those who are here in studio, and those of you who are online, joining us online today. My name is Lonwabo Patrick Kulati. I work here at Good Governance Africa, and today we have a very important topic that we'd like to talk about. How can we ensure that the GNU, or the Government of National Unity, is held accountable? The big issue that we would also like you at home, those who are watching online, whether you're driving or whatever the case may. I hope you're not driving. You're at office or something like that. Feel free to write your questions. We'll find a way of getting to them. And those who are here in the studio here, please feel free to ask questions as well, to engage. We want this to be an engaging event. And I'm really appreciative of my panelists here. I will tell you a bit more about them now. We're doing this in partnership with the Mail and Guardian. The Mail and Guardian is our partner. They are making sure that it's streamed online. And for those of us who may not be able to watch it now live, you can always go online and watch it there. We still are quite keen to hear from you, even if you're not live right now. And I'd like to welcome you again to this program right here. Let me start by introducing the people on my left. It's insightful and incisive panel. When we were looking at people to select, these people came to mind because of how they deal with matters that we're going to be talking about today. The first one, which is right here in the middle, is Mabato Mungai. Mabato is my colleague. She is a PhD candidate working here at GGA as a data analyst. She did her PhD at Wits University. She holds a BA in international relations and industrial psychology. And her main interests are comparative political economy, migration, democracy, quantitative research. You can see and hear that these are big names right here. She's also a sessional lecturer and a teaching assistant. And in addition to her academic interest, Mabato is a mentor to high school learners in Krugersdorp. We need more of that. She's passionate about the pursuit of knowledge and firmly believe that access to higher education for all is what is needed to improve the challenges of Africa. On my extreme left, sorry, I wrote them in a different way. I have Mr. Lukhona Nguni, and I think we all know Lukhona. He's a governance, politics, and development specialist. He currently serves as the acting executive director and head of policy and research at the Rivonia.
He's old enough.
Yeah. Almost.
Blame the book I'm just reading right now. Okay. At the Rivonia Circle. He also played in the politics broadcasting space, having hosted a flagship show, Power Talk on Power FM, a commercial radio station right here in Johannesburg, as well as on ENCA, On the Spot with Lukhona Nguni. He is a conference speaker, both locally and internationally, invited by a variety of organizations, from banking sectors to investors and various organizations. And he is also serving sometimes, avails himself to serve as a board member to organizations that aligns with his vision, like Oxfam Democracy Development Program, Macquarie Trust. And so he's now busy with his PhD in political science at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban. He holds a bachelor degree in community development studies and honors degree in conflict transformation and peace studies, both achieved at University of KwaZulu-Natal. He has completed his MSc in Africa International Development at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. And he is a published scholar. Welcome, Lukhona.
Thank you.
Welcome to you too.
Thank you.
All right. Is right here in the middle with the cap on. We've got Dr. Kagiso TK Pue, who is a senior lecturer focusing on 5 specialist public policy themes. Firstly, on local economic development, looks at initiatives, policies, and strategies implemented within specific municipal regions in order to enhance and advance economic development. Law and development, a field that examines the intersection of legal systems, institutions, and socio-economic development. Thirdly, future planning and thinking. You can see that I've got a thinking group of people right here, which focuses on crafting policy decisions that attempt to ascertain what future public policy and institutional ideas can be used to address problems. Failure analysis, that's another focus area, which investigates why policies don't achieve their intended goals. I think it's a very important topic, Claire. Number 5, he teaches or focuses on the national interest study, which examines and tries to understand the fundamental goals and objectives of a state in various foreign-related policy aims and objectives. He has lectured and consulted for various institutions, including the Northwest University, University of KwaZulu-Natal, GIPS, and Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institution. Before joining academia on a full-time basis, he worked as a public policy research consultant at the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. And welcome to you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, man, for joining us. Right here on my left, I've got Dr. Karin Abrams, also a senior lecturer at Wits School of Governance, yes, who holds a PhD in social and political science from the University of Edinburgh. We've got another graduate from Edinburgh here, in the Center for African Studies. She completed her master's, honors, and undergrad studies at the University of Witwatersrand with specialization in human and urban geography. Before joining Wits, she was a senior researcher at Gauteng City Region Observatory in partnership with the University of Witwatersrand, University of Johannesburg, and the Gauteng province, where she focused on things like social cohesion, anti-racism, urban inclusion, and urban food systems in the province of Gauteng. She's also completed a postdoctoral fellowship in development studies at UNISA and was a research manager at the Ahmed Kadrada Foundation. Wow. Audience, what do you say to this? Can we give them a round of applause? Wow. I don't know. I mean, how many years of study, if we can stack them up, and how many areas of specialization that we have here. It's amazing to have such a well-qualified and a well-knowledgeable panel. Welcome, colleagues. Good to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you're all right. Okay, now let's get started. And I also want to welcome those people that have just joined right now. As you know, that accountability, the principle of accountability, is one of good governance principles, if you just read up on it. And before we get even further, I'd like us to just paint a picture. For this GNU, what needs to be in place? What way should they behave for us to say, now we have good governance, which is accountable? Now we have an accountable government in South Africa. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Abrams. Maybe you want just to share with us what is your ideal picture of a government that is accountable to its people?
Thanks for that, Lonwabo. I'm going to take us down a different road a little bit before we get to the positive, the ideal
Okay.
situation.
All right.
So I approach this question like I do to my students about thinking about the nature of the state. So in this case, I want to ask a different question. Is this something which potentially makes the GNU a different kind of institution than we have come to know so far in South African government? If there isn't something kind of magical, like a magic wand about this kind of coalition arrangement that suddenly transforms politics as we've come to know, then it's still made of the stuff of politics that we are very much used to. So it follows that if we think about the institutional dynamics of this so-called government of national unity or this coalition, we need to think about it a little bit more. So many people have used different metaphors, like a marriage of inconvenience or marriage of convenience or strange bedfellows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or an arranged marriage and other relational metaphors. I want to offer a different one. To me, what comes to mind when I think about different organizations running alongside each other in one territory, but not quite yet in a harmonious way, I think of the metaphor of mob lords or mafias.
Oh, wow.
They are hierarchical structures.
Yeah.
To maintain order and discipline, not essentially first of the people or the streets, but within their own organizations. There's the code of Omerta, the secrecy, to protect the organization from formal accountability structures. There may be the power to secure particular group interests, operating at different scales to enforce their own power. So a true accountability is not about the mechanisms of the state for mafia. It's only and ever for the internal hierarchy of the organization. And we shouldn't be fooled that suddenly we have this ideological kind of different way of working. So that for me is a picture of how it is. But we don't only want to be pessimists and cynics. And that's where you're pushing us to.
Yeah, I just want to have a picture,
Yes.
ideal picture.
So if we dream a little and if we have this ideal picture, then we can say that a true test is how each party or organization concedes the group interest for the common good. Of course, it has a further test, how it defines the common good, not as a set of individual organizational interests like a mafia kind of system within a territory, but as an outcome of reasoned and legitimate, credible arguments. So we can dream a little and we can imagine something about vertical accountability to other parties and to other institutions as we hold each other accountable. And so much less than this kind of magical idea of an organization that suddenly fixes itself, that it's a compulsion to accountability across the institution.
Okay. I think we're going to come back and unpack some of the issues. Maybe other colleagues want to chip in here. What in your view is the ideal? How would we know that we have a government of national unity that's accountable?
I actually share the same sentiments. As you're speaking, I'm like, alignment. Because I think that right now, and I mean, it's still very too early to tell what direction things are at. So I suppose that's why you use the word ideal accountability. I think that right now, situation, crisis, opportunities will unveil what the GNU unfolds to, even in terms of accountability. Every member has taken an oath of office. However, like you were saying, what's unique about this is that it's not just one single party that determines the structure or the political landscape, so to speak, but it's different political parties with different perspectives. And we are yet to see the teething process. However, the plus side or the ideal version of that is that it's different political parties that can appeal to different constituents. And in terms of accountability, it's within their leadership, holding, or even citizens and the rest of society, keeping them account, them keeping each other into account, and them actually making this idea of accountability less broad and less just because you say it doesn't mean that you are. So formulating more practical ways of keeping each other accountable, and then, the rest of us, making it easier for us not to have to hold government to account.
Okay, all right. Colleagues, as we're chatting here. It's just a conversation. It's just that we have a conversation with people listening and watching. So chip in at any point you feel like. Anyone of you who wants to go.
Does it? Well,
Yeah.
look, I think the first probably start I'd make is, and this is where I've always probably had an issue with the concept, is the naming of the term GNU. Now, concepts of power. In truth, this is a grand
I
coalition.
know you have a different.
Yeah,
view
so
about that.
I think so. For me, that was the first failure.
Yeah.
Is that how can you name it a government of national unity, and then you put the facade of 1994? Well, in 1994, the ANC had actually won an election and won it quite handsomely, and they were gracious and magnanimous to say, "Listen, we're inviting you into this." Now, look, I know we've got so many cabinet ministers that I probably lost track, but I didn't see a Minister Malema, or should we say Deputy President Malema, if rumors are to be believed. And I didn't see an MK representative. So I think that for me was the first failure. That instead of being honest and saying, listen, our politics is at a moment where there is a bit of an inflection point. And the inflection point is, look, people want to make this coalition seem like it's a natural thing. It's not natural. The reason we got to a coalition is the governing party of over the last 3 decades has absolutely failed. And citizens chose to stay home. I think 58% of people only rocked up.
Huge number.
So this is what it gave us, right? Now, I'm not going to be like a certain minister and blame people and saying, you gave us this outcome, therefore it's your fault. I'm simply going to say, I think we need to be natural in to understand how we got to this point.
Yeah.
So to say then, what do we look for? What kind of markers we look for? Well, look, the first marker one's going to look for was a bit of humility.
Okay.
One, not only on the side of the ANC, because if you're the DA, the only thing that you basically did is you spent X amount of money to simply go back to the results of 2016. Right? So are these two parties humble to understand where they are? It's a bit iffy at the moment. We don't quite know there. So let's look at more formal structures. Right? For me, I'm going to start judging it when we have the budgets, when budgets get passed by, right? When we have to have policy discussions to see how do you vote? Do you vote in the same way that got you into the same problems your parties are in? Or are you going to take a different tack to say, listen, this is an opportunity, or maybe this is a bit of a time where we need some self-reflection?
Yeah.
So that's how I'll formally judge it. Because I think on the first instance in terminology and in action, it's been a failure. Because what we have is a grand coalition. It's not a government of national unity. And maybe this also touches on, and I know I don't want to jump to there, how our media interprets this, because I think they've been complicit in this facade of a government of national unity.
And you know that
I think my dear brother here is showing us his political affiliation. That you would have enjoyed the proceedings
that
of the
are taking place.
SABC and the MK party, where the judgment has been withheld to challenge this terminology of GNU. I mean, look, it's a function of South African politics, and I've been decrying this for the last 15 years. The national discourse agenda has been set by politicians too much. There is actually a very serious dislike for public intellectuals in this country, both by politicians and, of course, the audiences that get influenced by politicians, and then people side with politicians. So the deficit really, in terms of calling this for what it is, really comes from there. Because, I mean, the 1994 government of national unity was preemptive. It had thresholds. You get 20%, you get to be a deputy president. You get 10%, you get to be in cabinet. And that's why it was only among 3 parties. The National Party, when the 1996 constitution did not provide for it, they walked away and they said, okay, our time has eroded here. But I mean, in effect, when we talk about the principle of accountability, there's always a marriage of 2 other principles in terms of good governance speak. I mean, that's transparency and that's responsiveness.
Yeah.
Because accountability can't just be a floating concept. I was saying to somebody, we're at a meeting now before I came here. I landed in East London sometime, I think 2 years ago. And there was an entire entourage of people to welcome somebody. It really turns out that I was on a flight with the Krisanit district mayor. And they had received a clean audit, and these people were carrying placards to welcome the mayor, congratulating on the clean audit. And I thought, this is bizarre. when did we get here?
Mm.
And so, is this arrangement going to raise the bar in terms of what is the threshold for accountability?
Yeah.
Because we've made governance so audit oriented that achieving a clean audit is actually things that municipalities and government departments, they host parties. No, seriously, they host parties for a clean audit.
Sure.
That's the basic, that's baseline. That should be baseline. So is this arrangement going to be like that? What is going to be the change in the architecture of accountability? So I mean, if you have listened to the debate on the president's opening address, the concept of a presidency portfolio committee in parliament, which the IFP has been fighting for years. It seems as if you get into the GNU, you get muted a bit because I've not heard them raise this thing properly. But it's quite important. I mean, the presidency has over 500 employees currently. It's the most bloated presidency we have ever seen. The SOEs are being moved for now into the presidency. Operation Vulindlela is spearheaded in the presidency, which has very collusive and problematic private-public partnerships going on. And therefore, there has to be this, appetite to be accountable, because you accept that the GNU, which I agree with you, by the way, that's not a GNU, but I mean, we use it colloquially.
Yeah.
So for everybody's understanding.
Yes.
Because now if you get Grand Coalition, you have to start explaining what that is. The GNU represents about 70% of represented political parties in parliament. In that environment, you then have to have optics and mechanisms for accountability. Which is why I disagreed with the ANC during the negotiations. I had lots of calls with some of their senior guys. And I said, you can't take the speaker to the ANC or the DA. The speaker of parliament ought to be somebody who has a degree of independence from the two dominant parties, so that optically it doesn't look like you are trying to strong arm parliament to being a rubber stamping mechanism for the GNU. And they got the concept, but they were not ready to let go of the power. So we disagreed fundamentally on this as a principle, and I still disagree with them as a principle. So in terms of optics, I don't think they understand, because there are two competing issues that are going to frustrate accountability in the GNU. One regional secretary, I was at a funeral in East London again, not long ago, now in July. He stands up and speaks at this funeral, and he says, we must accept that the ANC has lost power, but tactically, the ANC has won. Now, that sense of denialism tells you that there isn't going to be clear ease of consensus on what needs to be re-architectured in the makeup of the state, and what needs to be discarded. And I think, as TK is saying, I mean, passing of budgets, I mean, besides passing of budgets, President on the 18th of July says they need to go to a strategic session. So I wonder what the Lehuta was about, the cabinet Lehuta, if they need a strategic session. So you can already see that the points of disagreement are very difficult to iron out. And in that environment, potentially then to think of mechanisms for accountability is going to be difficult for the lot of people who are in the room.
Okay, so there's been quite a lot that has been said so far. We need to unpack it a bit more, because the issue of the naming of this thing, different institutions that are there. I was reading on the Helen Suzman Foundation website where they had produced a policy brief which was saying, it took us back to post 1994, where they say South Africa could be said to be going through an accountability crisis. And so they name examples, all the scandals, all the political problems that we've had, the weakening and the function of government institutions, the gross violations of procurement policies, the capture of the state, and so on. So in short, the democratic system didn't work to show accountability. Now, that was with the ANC in power. Now with the GNU, which what is called the GNU colloquially, as you said, do we hope for a different outcome? Is the presence of the DA or the UDM and all these other parties, does it give us hope, or does it say we still have to wait and see what's going to happen? Yeah.
So one of the biggest challenges will be navigating internal political interests and the interests of the nation. It's almost like, so with each of the political parties represented within this GNU, what are they first? Are you first DA and then government of the nation? Are you first ANC and then, and going back to the term that you used, and I think that it also aligns with long-term versus short-term vision, because, and it's, Tika was right to say that there is a lot of power in the use of languaging. So on the one hand, and I'm going to go back to the example of, you know, the use of the word GNU, I'm just thinking of, it almost creates like a euphoria. And how long would it last? Because I don't think that themselves had a pre-vision for this. It was out of necessity.
Sort of an afterthought.
Precisely. So even in terms of, and even then, the goal was, how do we secure power, or not so power or seats, power slash seats. How do we make sure that, and it goes back to the disillusionment part, how do we make sure that we can still, who can help us retain some form of power and some form of positioning? But going back to your initial question, which was, how do we, can you just repeat the last part again?
Which one? Okay. Basically, what I want to find out is there hope that's presented by the fact that we now have more parties, 11 or 10 parties, you know, with the ANC there, that we didn't have before in the area of accountability? Does that provide hope that because we have different parties from different backgrounds, different ideologies, perhaps they could hold each other accountable? Do we have that hope, or do we still say, wow, we're going to have to wait and see?
Yeah. So I think the long and short of it would be that it's 50-50. Only time will tell. Because like I had mentioned initially, that the presence of different political parties has the ability of ensuring that different voices, interests are represented. And at the same time, it could also mean that you compromise on what you would have initially opposed. So once again, what are you first? Are you first your political party or the government? When it comes to certain key issues, are you going to speak up, or are you going to look out for internal interests?
All right. Anyone else?
Look, I think on the whole thing, I'll probably turn it in the reverse and say, I guess the fact that we're having this conversation for me is probably the problematic issue, right? There's this belief that I think Lukona partially touched on it, that and look, I think it's a fixture of our history, right?
Yeah.
I always, my dad and I always have this argument that it's very rare that you come from a history where you had a Subuko, Biko, Tambo, like literally lineage upon lineage upon lineage, those types of people, time after time. So in the South African psychosis, there's always a leader that's going to save us. And I think we're always stuck in this, right? Look, and it runs even across racial lines. I mean, if electors within the National Party, right, and how the NP was set up for vote, it's a psychosis that's called the South African psychosis. But the problem, and this is where the hope, where I'm not so, is that I think the Bible says you hope and miss, right? We're miss because we're not even speaking about what really is the problem of the state, the problematic state of South Africa. You have unemployment, which unofficially is standing at what, 50 plus?
Almost.
Yeah, 50 plus. And there's young people.
Yeah.
You have provinces like the Eastern Cape, Free State, Limpopo partially, and Northwest. Look at what future do people hope for, right? That's so for me, it's not so much the hope of the politics. For me, I'm not hopeful because I don't think we're asking the right questions.
Okay.
We are a state in crisis, but we're acting as though we're a state where things are going to get right in the first 5 years. There's a trick in policy. They teach you that you will only really see a policy problem after 10 years. We have not even got to that discussion of what is wrong with the state. We know there's unemployment, right?
Yeah.
But we never go deeper to say, listen, how do you sort that out? So the reason I'm not so hopeful is that we're so fixated on the politics, and look, rightfully so, we've just come out of this, but we're not having the correct discussion. The discussion we should be asking is, how does South Africa, one, resolve its youth unemployment problem? Two, does it still make sense in this day and age that we have a 3-tier system of government? When we all know in 1994, the reason why provinces were given was because of, I always say, nefarious actors in the NGO spaces and politics that necessitated that we have provinces, right?
Yeah.
And then thirdly, there's a question, and I know the Good Governance Africa sort of partially touched on it, I think it's number 9 or 10, which is South Africa standing in SADC. SADC is at its weakest. ever in the last 2 decades. Why? Because South Africa has been asleep at the wheel.
Mm.
You have a president who can go to Zim, and I say this, I'm normally a bit more restrained when I'm said to be diplomatic. I'm not like my friend Matala who was in the crowd. But I view ZANU-PF as an existential threat to South Africa.
Mm.
The Zimbabwean situation threatens the very core of what South Africa is.
Mm.
Yet we have a president who can go there, basically affirm that this ZANU-PF threat is fine.
Mm.
So that's why I'm saying we're not having the right conversations in the media and even within NGOs.
Mm.
We're looking at this thing called I always say South Africans love shiny things.
Yeah.
The latest new shiny thing is,
We ran for it.
and I'll still say it, Lukona, it's a grand coalition. You can call it what you want, but so I'm saying until we have those conversations, because those conversations will force us then to be a bit more humble in terms of what we can expect. And I think the first thing is, and Lukona I know has touched on it a bit, is I have to go to KZN because when you're married in KZN, supposedly you become part of KZN.
Yeah.
And when you actually go to rural areas, people they're not hopeful. I was in Mthatha about 2 months back. People know who the crime lords are in the area.
Yeah.
People know that the government is not going to deliver.
Yeah.
But we then expect that people are going to have a different view of what this grand coalition is going to be. So for me, I think we hope, but we hope a miss.
All right. I get your sense that I mean we can't hope that this GNU will give us if we do not interrogate the underlying key questions. Anyone else wants to chime in?
I think interrogating the idea of accountability and how it's been thought about in the South African state is also something that we need to interrogate and get to the bottom of. For now, in my view, the idea of accountability has been treated as this kind of normative virtue that we should all aspire to, a higher calling that we should always, hold our politicians to. And that is important in and of itself, for sure. But if it only remains normative, then it means that it doesn't translate into the most effective mechanisms or consequences of the lack of accountability. So what would work is if the new Grand Coalition GNU sits around the table and makes some bold decisions about rethinking accountability. Not just assuming, first of all, that someone out there is going to keep us accountable, or that we exist for the outside world in a kind of international relations space, but also that it's not only reporting mechanisms that keep us accountable or the clean audit that we can celebrate, but it is about saying, how are individual office bearers answerable to someone? But who is the someone? It can't be the AG only. And it can't just be the party. It has to be the multi-party system around it, but also not just citizens as an afterthought. So accountability is always relational and it's always hierarchical. But if we think that citizens are just an afterthought, they're not the office bears that are now above us to answer to. They are just people that we need to consult with, rather than thinking about turning the idea of accountability on its head. That says, no, we don't want to, as our first order of the GNU, seek an audience with big business. The first order of the GNU must seek an audience with civil society and the people that have lost trust in the politics and in the individuals around the table. And I think that is the kind of bold decision that the GNU has the opportunity to make now, to rethink the mechanisms, not just say, Chapter 9 institutions are there, use it, but to actually make themselves accountable to the decisions and the findings of the Chapter 9 institutions, rather than protecting themselves through these political kind of mechanisms that keep them immune to real accountability.
I think what you've done, Karim, is just to start sort of looking at some of the mechanisms of accountability, which I'd like us to now transition to look into, starting with the parliamentary oversight and linking that to opposition parties. I think someone had mentioned that there are parties which are outside the government of national unity. So I'd like us to combine this conversation, both in terms of the political, so the parliamentary oversight, in terms of the committees that are there, the fact that we now have chairpersons of those committees. Some of them do not belong to the main party, which is the ANC. What is your sense of the adequacy of the parliamentary oversight under this GNU? What's your sense of that?
Well, I mean, parliamentary oversight has collapsed for the last 15 to 20 years in this country. And that's just because the quality of the politician has really hit rock bottom. The core nub of our political system and what we are struggling with is that we have a quality of politician, one who at times does not even understand really what is before them. And if you don't understand what is before you, you cannot do oversight.
But yeah.
You then rely on gossip and just a few people and all of those things. I mean, if you look at the parliaments of 1994, 1999, perhaps maybe 2004, and you look at the quality of people, even in the likes of the opposition benches. I mean, I was reminding some DA fellows themselves, saying, you've got 6 ministers you've deployed to government, a third of them are matriculate. It was 2 out of 6 are matriculate. And yet you used to have a DA which would have people like, Wilmot James, James Self, Lindy Wemazibuko, Sheila Cameron, Taliad. I mean, really, really talented people, well versed in what they were doing and specialized in some form of knowledge. And I think because we are now entering a red race in our politics, we are forever being demanded to ask for lower standards. Now, the Constitution, of course, is inherently correct, as Advocate Moerane found in his commission on political violence in KwaZulu-Natal, that you can't legislatively create a demand that candidates should be people who are qualified. But political parties can create a political culture where they seek to send the best amongst themselves to go and be public representatives because they understand the enormity of the tasks that is connected to this. Now, if you do an audit of parliamentarians, what is it that they bring? How are they chosen to occupy the portfolio committees to which they occupy? Some of the people who chair, certain portfolio committees. And then you've got to ask yourself, really, are these people who appreciate the seriousness of oversight? If you make someone like former minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, a portfolio chairperson, do you really have confidence, given how he left the portfolio, that he will be a good person for oversight? If you look at Supra Mahumapelo, who's now on his second term as a portfolio chairperson, does it augur well? I mean, of course, you've got some new entrants of portfolio chairpersons like Ian Cameron, portfolio chair for police. He's been an activist in the space. Is that good? Is that going to bode well? Will he do oversight, or will he use it as an extension to fight his own fight? So again, we must ask these questions about what is it that we are looking for when we say that, we are looking for oversight, because Parliament has a duty, one, oversight, of course, over executive action, but oversight over legislation making. Are we going to see a renewed attitude towards public participation, for example, saying, think first about people? And there are mechanisms there. There's a public participation framework that is in place, but you go, I went to Hammanskraal during the electoral amendment bill consultations. Political parties have scripted. This is when I realized that there's a circus, really.
It's just a child's play.
30 people stand up with the same script, and the chairperson of the meeting allows them to read the same thing. It's not a game of quantity. Public participation is not a game of quantity. It's about the quality of input that you are trying to make to the thinking and imaginative process for policy formulation and legislative formulation. So I think the quality of politician, unfortunately, has just completely eroded the possibility of these things. And the other problem that you then have, to what Mabatu was talking about, I mean, internal considerations for political parties. I still believe that our parliamentary executive system is problematic. The seniors get to go to the executive. then they must appear before their juniors, their political juniors. Now, we have seen people being summoned to Lutuli House, Nyamezeli Boy, when he was fighting with Lindiwe Sisulu when she was Minister of Defense. He was summoned to Lutuli House to say, you can't be fighting the minister and an NEC member like this, you are embarrassing him. Why did people like Andrew Feinstein leave this country during the arms deal saga? And so for me, I would actually challenge and say, if you look at arms deal, there was actually attempts for accountability. The Scopa portfolio of that time under Gavin Woods was actually very, very serious about holding the executive to account. Accountability was circumvented by political interests that then summoned people to Lutuli House. I mean, Andrew has been gone for so long that he even stood as a candidate for UK elections recently. That's how long he has been gone for, from his own country. So he attempted to do accountability. So what has been happening is a purging of people who actually understand what oversight is and an infusing of completely useless politicians in parliament. And unfortunately, that's the chaff that we are left with now. Every good other person, you are sent to some board, to be an ambassador, and of course, like his new boss now, you are ejected out of government.
Which boss are you speaking about?
All right, we're going to come back to that now. Just want to, again, to acknowledge those people that are here live and those that are online live joining us now. I'd like to say thank you so much. You are joining us at the time we're discussing the GNU and accountability, and we have covered quite a bit of ground today. The sense that I'm getting is that there's not much hope necessarily because there's so much stuff that we're uncertain about, but we're unpacking a lot of that stuff. There are some questions that have come through. I just want to read some of them as much as I can. There's a friend of mine who sent me a WhatsApp message this morning, and he's here now writing. He says, political parties in the so-called GNU, he says in the GNU with different ideologies and policy stances may have conflicting priorities, making it difficult to agree on a common agenda. Rugby and football shorts, none of these critics of them of the term GNU are suggesting or providing any solution. In my view, the term itself cannot determine the future of this country, but the commitment to drive the country forward. Thanks, Speech. Thanks, Mkobam. I also have got Ray here. He says, I'm still cynical. I think, is it this Ray here?
Let's hear you.
We have another Ray here. Ray White. He says, this Ray says, I think the GNU is a stopgap solution for the ANC to claw back some support. There is no long-term goal or plan. Is this a ploy till we get back to business as usual? Says Ray. Zama Gwaju says, what can the so-called GNU do to gain the trust and support of those eligible voters who did not bother to participate in the voting process? So just keep this in your mind as we are talking, so that you can pick and choose where you think you want to engage. And then Molebo Heng Motweneng says, it is likely the crisis of accountability for South Africa will accelerate. I fail to see how the GNU is different from coalition, because in practical terms, GNU will rely on agreements tendered after the election. And Pravina Naidu says the GNU may be a stopgap or last resort measure. It's here, and it will remain here for at least the immediate to short-term future. We should be asking, how is this good for the country and our people versus an ANC government with a DA opposition? And if not the GNU, what would be more a viable alternative to this thing? It is also time South African populace stated or started claiming their rights to be accounted to. So I'm just gonna keep it like that for now, and I'll come back and read some of the questions that are coming, but just keep them coming. We really appreciate the engagement, because we want to have the country talking. This country belongs to all of us. So far we've talked about the issue of political or parliamentary oversight, and I want us to talk on the issue of the opposition parties that speech was talking about. Now, that are not part of the GNU. What role can they play, or are they better positioned to be able to really hold this GNU to account? We're going to be talking about the media. We're going to be talking about civil society, communities, and all of that. Those are mechanisms of holding the state to account. So, and who wants to go first?
Well,
Yeah.
On the opposition.
JK.
Yeah. Look, I'm
Your-
actually
your
quite. Man, it's problematic. Look, I'm actually happy about the man of opposition because I've always said that South Africa really there is no ideology in our politics. Truth be told,
Absolutely.
There's no ideology.
there's no ideology. Look, maybe because people come through the system of SASCO, SACP, DA Youth, Women's League. People believe, oh, there's no. Read the policies. Policy gives you where ideology goes. And if I think the exercise that they did, where the president asked all the DGs to go through the political parties' manifestos and say, where's the difference?
Yeah.
Well, the report wasn't given, but I think the subtweet was maybe the ANC and they are not so apart in many of the things that they espouse, right?
We've heard that a lot.
Yeah. So what makes me happy is that maybe we're actually going to get to the point where we're actually going to have an actual opposition, right? In the sense that, look, MK might not be your tea or your cup of tea, but I'm actually quite happy about it because they're actually saying things that we should be discussing. For instance, I know people like Bolikwana become very sensitive when I say this, but I'm not a constitutionalist. I don't like the South African Constitution. And I don't see why when you raise this in a discussion that people start saying, oh, no, this guy must be an MK. Oh, this must be an MK. But we never get to the point of what is the MK actually saying, right? Because it means that, look, if 58% of the people only turned up, it means somebody woke up in the morning and decided, I'm going to go vote for this party, fully knowing the history of the person who represents that party, right?
Yeah.
And said, listen, I want to do this. Now, I always say this, that South Africa's constitution, as it's currently constituted, speaks to the metropole of our country, those that live in these urban places, right?
Yeah.
And was an elite that basically came together. And this is not just a shot at the constitution. I'm even having a shot at the fabled Freedom Charter of the ANC, which has never really been discussed to say, is this what people really wanted? My understanding and reading of liberation was that people were very clear. It's the economy stupid. And we never really had that discussion. So what makes me happy about the opposition is not the quality right now, because I think they might have the human capital, because we can't take away from the former judge's qualifications. He's brilliant by all accounts. Morality notwithstanding, he is brilliant. But I think maybe this is a step in the right direction where we can actually start saying, listen, we are going to start putting people forward who are going to oppose things based on actual substance. To say, listen, we need to have a reconsideration of, do we really want to be a liberal democracy? 1. 2, do we really need these 3 tiers of government? 3, and what is our role on the continent? Type of thing. Because it might be questions which are a bit uncomfortable, but that also maybe speaks to a generational shift which is happening. Because I would argue that the old generation has this comfortability with the status quo. And maybe this new opposition, and you notice I say new. Here I'm speaking about people like Gator McKenzie. You might not like his politics, but when you go home, like I come from Everton here in Gauteng, when you go home and you speak to people about questions of migration, 10 years ago, there, if you spoke about migration, saying we want to get rid of, oh no, this is a xenophobe, we must get rid. Even the ANC would say this language, but even the ANC is learning that maybe citizens have got a point. We should be up to us to say, listen, when we mean we're bringing people in, this is what we need. And I think even universities have been very complicit. I think universities sometimes have been the worst form of accountability, including people such as myself who are commentators, because I don't think we really are in the ground to hear what people are saying.
Okay.
So I think I'm happy about where opposition is going, not necessarily the vehicles that are there.
But I do want us to think about opposition beyond MKP. Eh?
Yes.
There's EFF, there's ATM, and what else? So, but I get the point.
Progressive caucus.
It is the progressive caucus that's right there. I'm gonna come to you soon, but let me just give. You want to say something? Who wants to go first? Yeah.
I'm not going to pick on any particular opposition party that's not represented.
Yeah.
But I want to make the point that what we tell our students, for example, is that argument is something worth valuing and protecting.
Yeah.
So it's very rare that I agree with TK, but I'm going to agree on this point.
Yeah.
That we do not have, there's no time to have a robust discussion about what accountability means, or what kind of democracy we are, or are we a democracy, or is there a benevolent dictatorship on the cards? The idea of putting things on the table that we can debate, that we can disagree about. I think in South Africa there's been this culture of manufacturing consensus, and too soon to reach consensus for peace, for experience, for passing budgets and all of those things. But I think the real power of democracy comes in when we can disagree around the same table, and then come to a point that says, yes, we disagree, but I've been challenged by your view. And I'm not just saying the status quo because I'm calling back to a document that I haven't thought about for the last 50 years. But I am forced to think about it now in our current political conjuncture, and forcing the idea of debate as testing the metal of democracy.
Can I just challenge? I'll come to you now. Can I just challenge, or just not challenge, but just put this point there? The idea of debate and ideology that you were talking about. You know, this country is known for debates and meetings. We are now talking about the national dialogue and all of that kind of stuff. There's a sense at which people are, are asking for pragmatism when things are going to be done. I think one of you is a student of implementation of things like that. So how do we balance these two? The need for us to keep talking, because the sense is that 1994, before the constitution, was an outcome of this debate that we're talking about. And so some people say, all right, now we have clear principles, like even that guides in terms of what do we mean by accountability and oversight and things like that. At what point is the country going to move forward beyond debate, beyond towards really dealing with the issues that are affecting people, like joblessness and lack of economic growth and all those kinds of things?
So I'm going to say two things before attempting to answer your question.
Yeah.
One, I think that the GNU is symbolic of a maturing democracy, and what it symbolized for the ordinary South African is that change is possible, that it is possible to vote alternatively. But what it also speaks into, and in my opinion, I think that no political party, political parties have had a limited ability to engage and to understand the political psyche and the evolving political psyche of ordinary South Africans. The fact that with every national and local election, there's a decline in voter turnout. Yet, when we speak about accountability, sometimes we tend to deflect it to ordinary citizens, to NGOs, and so forth. If you look at different forms of political engagement, be it protest action, be it other forms of political expression, if you look at Afrobarometer data, South Africa, I think, ranks third highest in terms of civic engagement. So now this ties in with the latter question that you had asked in terms of how can we somewhat
Balance.
I would say this: political parties have a huge task at hand. I would agree to say that there is no single solution to this. In terms of implementation, policy takes years. We can discuss and agree now that, okay, these are the different policies to address poverty and inequality, to address crime and so forth. But it doesn't mean that within a year, within 2 years, that is going to happen.
Yeah.
And the tension that happens between the formation of policy and the actual effects of the policy is the frustration that happens in between. So while policy is busy rolling out, what do you do with in between? What do you do with growing frustration? What are you growing with growing unemployment, growing poverty? And this is where political parties find themselves. Not only this is where, as South Africa, never mind political parties, but as South Africa, where we find ourselves. But there's also a major backlog. If you and everything happens in synchronization. No department, Department of Home Affairs cannot work in isolation to the Department of Labor and so forth. So it's almost having to go back to the drawing board. And this is where the major tension of, I think, and TK alluded to this, is that do South Africans have the patience to see this through? And are we willing to live out the sacrifices for the long-term vision? I'm just thinking of the Beijing, one of the key areas of strategies that President Ramaphosa pointed out is contributing, or South Africa becoming a developmental state. Sounds nice, sounds bougie, sounds progressive, but it comes with a lot of sacrifice. When I think of Beijing during like the around the 1950s, 60s, the conversation there was, this generation is a sacrificial lamb. But the return is your kids and your kids' kids will enjoy the sacrifice that you'll be making now.
No.
Are we actually willing to do that?
I'm glad she raises Beijing.
Yeah.
The friend who just came back from China, I said, how was it? She says to me, you know, there are a lot of people there, but things work. World-class services at affordable rates. If you earn about 50,000 rands in China, you are able to live a very decent life and travel. And of course, I mean, I'm talking to the elites. You know, some people in this room may not like being called elites, but everybody here is an elite. 50,000 rands a month, you imagine and think, yeah, I can get by. Travel and so on. That's stretching it. And I said to her, you know, I get a sense that there are countries where politicians actually work, and there are countries where politicians don't work. So in South Africa, politicians are ceremonial beings. They get into the vehicle,
When are we going to change this?
harass us with blue lights, chasing the next event, cut a ribbon, get into the blue lights, give a speech. You know, a politician will get invited to a conference. They speak. Oh no, minister has to go. Because we have implanted in their minds that they are there for us to see them
Yes.
and for them to give us their bravado.
Just
They're
their
not-
presence is enough.
They are not here to work, sit through the conference, listen at the deliberations.
Engage.
So in actual fact, what ends up happening, and the problem why continuous debate and discussion has become a problem, is because we are talking amongst ourselves. We are not talking amongst and with the people who really matter. You'll have an entire government conference, you sit through there, government ministers and officials are coming and going as they please. So who are we talking? Because the substance is not in the conference outcome resolution, but it's trying to gauge the substance and the granular frustration and hear it as people express it. Now, this friend of mine, of course, he's correct. I'm a constitutionalist. Because if we were in Zimbabwe, we wouldn't have this conversation. The constitution helps us to have a framework upon which we can debate and discuss how to improve society. It doesn't mean we can't amend the constitution. I mean, my submissions to Parliament, for example, on Section 25 is that Section 25 must be amended. So that's not the point. But the point is that as we try and set up the parameters, our frustrations must not allow us to destroy the parameters of what could enable us to envision the kind of society we want to live in. And so it goes back again to the quality of politician. I mean, just go into any conference and sit and listen to a panel with a minister there. You cringe. It's like, why did they take this one now? And that's because the quality has eroded. I mean, when Xi Jinping, during COVID-19, wears a lab coat, it's not for a photo op. It's because he actually understands
what's happening.
Because he's trained. He understands why he's in that lab, what he's looking to see, what are the results. When, if using the philosophy term, he's experiencing bullshitting from those people who are saying that they are finding dealing with the pandemic. Here, we do not have that. Now, of course, there's only one reason why people opt out of politics. It's like why people opt out of church. You soon realize that I come here every Sunday, but my lot is not getting better because the church is not responding to the problems that I have. The politics are not responding to people's needs. One guy says in one conference we held in October 2022, when you buy furniture, it comes with a guarantee. If it's broken, I return it to the furniture shop. Politics, on the other hand, my vote has no guarantee. If the politician breaks the trust of my vote, it is eroded, which is why Now, what we are experiencing in actual fact from the political establishment is self-preservation with the Municipal Structures Amendment Bill. They say, if you are elected speaker, chief whip, whatever, have a 2-year holiday. There will be no motion of no confidence in you unless you make these serious violations, and they transport in cold storage Section 89 of the Constitution to the municipalities without any interrogation how it's going to work. But let's say for a second they get their way, which they won't, because we're going to fight them and take them to court, and I've told them.
Yeah.
You are saying the public must be stuck with an inefficient public servant for 2 years because you are trying to stabilize coalition government. It doesn't work like that. Why is it that our conversation is all about the you can put all institutions, but you can't legislate morality.
Yeah.
In this conversation, what is absent is how does the public then get to pressure politicians to be better beings?
All right. I think that's another point which we're going to come to together with the media. But I now need to engage with my audience right here. I see, Sis Pumla, you have a burning question.
She knows the politicians very well.
Thank you very much. I don't think I'm going to falter the panelists.
Yeah.
But I'm just rising because I feel very strongly with the point of politicians are allowed to get away with murder. And precisely because we don't really get to debate accountability, because at the moment we agonizing about the government of national unity, but we forget the people who have put them in that government of national unity. The citizens voted and said, this is what we want. But we don't go back and say, how do we make them to participate and force politicians to be accountable? Because I agree with Lukona to say, politicians have, whether consciously or unconsciously, have allowed the citizens to be docile. I've been in the public service from 1994. I had to seriously think, where did we go wrong? When they started in 1994, they used to take it seriously, the question of going to communities, because they were using the argument of saying citizens don't care whether it's a province or it's a local government or it's a national, they want to be served. They used to do that religiously. And I remember it was during Thabo Mbeki's time. She used the concept of city hall meetings. She never used to say it's a local government that used to do it. But I've recently heard a politician say, no, go and tell those people that it's a local government matter. What happened to them saying it doesn't matter whether it's a local government matter? If it comes on my table, let me address it. So I honestly think that the discussion should, because as far as I'm concerned, the politicians are going to push their ticket. They want the elections. They want to win again. They will politic and they will do their PR. They will not do the accountability that we envisage, me and you envisage. So it is for us to force them to do the right thing. And I think that's where I'm grappling with the debate of how do we get communities to go back to what they used to do in the 90s, in the 80s. Block committees, street committees, discussing their bread and butter issues, taking them up. I think people who stayed in Soweto still remember the Soweto 10, a committee of 10. People used to know that there was a street committee every week, and they would rotate in their houses to discuss they had meetings and they called bread and butter issues. And then something went wrong to say, no, we no longer need them. Can they dissolve those structures? So that is where I'm getting at, to say, I think politicians have allowed us to be docile. And as long as we allow that docile attitude, I don't think we're going to make progress. There's no way that this GNU is not going to reach a crisis if we are not going to force them to work together. Thanks.
All right. You're bringing the idea of civil society and community engagement in this. After many years, I think Lukona said civil society has been decimated basically by a lot of people that used to be activists. They've been absorbed into government from 1994. And so what happened is that, the idea of elected representatives being the ones who are now the big shots. All right. Do you want to ask a question? Yes, Ray.
I think what worries me the most, and I think what keeps me awake at night, and it seriously does, is the stability of our politics in this country. We have an MKP, and it's good to have a strong opposition, but are they stable? Are they actually stable? If you're going to change your MPs every 5 seconds, I think the leader of the Red Berets himself has sat up lately and thought, what on earth is going on here? I just lost my second in command. Where are we going with this?
Yeah.
And that worries me. It really does worry me.
Yeah.
Because we have this GNU, and you guys are right in what you're saying about your grand coalition. You're right. We have this GNU who are basically, what are they doing behind closed doors? Are they going to get up all of a sudden and walk out and say, we don't like each other? Like, where are we? And I think today's discussion is really, really good. So I would like to know. I think the listeners that I sometimes speak to, they would like to know, where on earth are we in this whole thing? Are we going to go blow up tomorrow, or are we just going to get to 5 years' time? And when we get to 5 years' time, will the MKP even be there? Maybe we don't have a JZ running around because he's no longer with us. So where are we? Where are we?
Where are we?
That's good.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dave. My brother wants to say something. Wants to ask a question here. Yeah.
No, thanks.
Where are we? How are you doing?
Good, thanks. I think mine is very simple, right? In terms of accountability with the GNU. I think maybe the question is phrased rather problematically. Maybe we could look at it from, in what ways can the presence of multiple political parties in public institutions influence the levels of accountability or alter the mechanisms of accountability within government, because ultimately the public institutions remain the same. It's only the presence of multiple political institutions that now gives rise to this kind of question. And I think one thing that I would like to touch on as well, that I think TK mentioned it earlier, there's a sense, especially in terms of the views of those who do not necessarily form part of the elites in society, tends to be suppressed. I think not only is the decline in the political class, the challenge of a decline in the political class that South Africa is faced with, we also have this decline of public intellectuals. There's a rise of what one may call public, or rather political correctness, in terms of framing issues and addressing issues, or what has been referred to as liberal totalitarianism, where everyone wants to sound the same. Diversity of thought is suppressed. Sis Pumla here mentioned making the public docile. Is it a matter of the public is being made docile, or is it because the public has been ostracized from pertinent discussions? To what extent? I think Lukona mentioned something about a public participation process in Hammanskraal, where a lot of people had a similar script. Public participation has been made a tick box exercise for quite some time. To what extent, even when we change these channels of public participation, do we incorporate the perspectives of the different sections of society in this formulation of policies, given the fact that we have grown to be a politically correct society? Yeah.
All right. You can. Okay. I'll come to us now, but I do want just to throw in some of the questions that are coming through online. But I think the main points that have come out so far is, where are we? The issue of public participation and the quality thereof, as well as the civil, the community participation. How do we bring people on board? But let me just go back to the online here, where Zolani Sandiso Zonyane says, indeed, Mtembu, I think he's referring to one of you here, clean audit is a certification that there's compliance with the law and internal controls work. My politics with clean audits is that they often don't translate to service delivery. All right. And this is a question I want us to go back to, in terms of how can communities at the local level hold the local authorities to account in terms of service delivery. And then Moleboheng says, again, the issue of individual political interests will have much influence on how accountability will turn out. Unfortunately, for the GNU, the learning journey will unfold and it's not going to be easy. And this worries me a bit because the issue of the learning and the negotiations and the talking, it doesn't match with the desperation and the need for action on things that people have been waiting for years. So that's why I want us to go back to this issue of what's going to be needing to be done now, not about a new policy or another meeting, but what needs to be done now to really address the pressing needs of the people. Can this GNU deliver on those? And if so, what in your mind are those things? And then he says the parliamentary oversight has collapsed greatly. And then what is the common agenda for the partners in the current coalition agreement? Will the coming together serve the interests of the broader public? Is Pure Hawula coming back again? E-missions ministries. He heard you talking about the Bible there. And then the accountability is more diluted through the GNU. Feeling is that there's a dilution. 5 years is not enough to start addressing the legacy governance issues. Oversight is good when there is a mechanism to enforce. Kiabetswe Mudise, sorry if I misspell your name, says South Africa GNU 2024 prevails the challenges to align politics and public administration. Without any alignment between the two, there will forever be a missing link in terms of ideas, actions, and M&E. Jivon Jacob says, my fear as a resident on the Western Cape, I think it's with WC, is that the GNU does not result in increased results in government deliverables. This is what I was talking about now, like service provision, housing, and so on. Not that the DA savior complex is the best. If anything, I think the GNU will halter a state responsibility to its society through political tension. Pumla Koza says, we as public need to be vigilant and give credit to those ministers doing their job. Doing so will put others under pressure and to prove themselves that they are also, they up the game. And Sweezy Vlogs says, we as the public have to explore avenues to engage and have tough conversations with politicians and make sure that we keep them accountable. Currently, we vote, sit back until we get cut for. Now, one of the things that has come up quite on social media, you've got these ministers like Gayton McKenzie, like McPherson and others who are more like out there, being seen to be doing something. And other people say, but what you say you did was started by the previous minister and all of that kind of stuff. And I think there's also a poster by the DA where they were saying this minister has addressed the issues of immigration or home affairs that that took the government 30 years to address. And then, so there's that bickering that's taking place where people are seeming to be trying to take credit for something. Now, the question is, where are we and how do we move forward from here?
I want to say a couple of things that maybe we'll touch on a few of the points
Yeah.
that are made. And by the way, just a shout out to all the WSG students who are commenting on
Oh, you know some of this.
okay. So for all the positive things that professionalizing the state or the public service has done,
Yeah.
one of the negatives
Yeah.
is that it has created an accountability discourse, say, that is very much like an insurance company and a client base, where you send your shareholder agreements, they read it in some gazette, and that's participation. But that has become the way that we do accountability, and also the way that we do public participation. And that's about professionalizing the state, this idea of the new public management and the private kind of the private sector practices has not only created the citizenry as just a stakeholder,
Tick box.
a
Stakeholder.
tick box that we need to placate
Mm.
and appease.
Mm.
But we are busy with our business as usual.
Mm.
So that's the first thing that it created. The second thing, it created a multitude of mechanisms for accountability.
Mm.
So reporting structures to the AG,
Mm.
reporting structures horizontally, different accountability bodies within departments itself. So
So you can
as
spend
much
your
as-
days basically just writing reports and going from
Precisely.
office to office without doing much.
and that is what we call doing government
Mm.
or changing society, or that is then what we look for when we say, have we delivered services? Yes, no, we've pushed the papers.
Mm.
But is there clean water coming out of your taps?
Mm.
No, but our accountability mechanisms are in place. And look, we have reported to the right structures.
Mm.
So the idea of treating this like a client-based stakeholder relationship is one of the problems.
Mm.
The second is this debate about whether it's created a docile public or whether it necessitates a docile public.
Mm.
Because a system like that necessitates it. Yes, we didn't help it, or the situation didn't help it that there were not more banging on doors and more rage
Mm.
from citizens.
Mm.
But if you treat us like a client base, then we're going to get your newsletters.
Mm.
So we become docile. And it relies on docility to say, no, we maintain the status quo and we keep doing business as usual because we have your franchise.
Mm.
Because you've given us representative authority to make decisions on your behalf.
Mm. Mm.
And so that's the other thing.
Mm.
I think that idea of this urgency, we want to see action.
Yeah.
I understand it, but I also want to caution, I mean, there's a risk in this, right?
Mm.
Because action is what we had, so-called action, in the past 30 years. We are moving on these things. We are making decisions. We have a good story to tell. All of those things. That was the government at work,
Yeah.
either pushing papers or whatever.
Mm.
But if we rush too much into just a
Pragmatism,
kind
action.
of silver bullet, let's fix that, let's fix that, let's fix that,
Mm.
then we get into the same rut, I think, that we have had with the culture of performance in the
Mm.
state.
Mm.
So you need to take it easy. Of course, there should be some red tape that we can say, let's cut that to make the decisions that have been waiting for 5 years to
Mm.
happen.
Mm. Mm.
That's the kind of action, I think,
Okay.
that will go beyond the risks of just saying we must act now
Mm.
without foresight or thought or thinking about centering the public.
Okay. I think there's a question, is this going to fall flat before the next 5 years, before the actions are done, before the implementation is done? Tika, I haven't heard you for a while.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm a listener. But
Yeah. But now you're here to talk. Yeah.
No, look, I take maybe a different view. People like saying, when is this going to fall? That's not really for me the problem. If it falls, it's not. I'm not the one who has to take the fall for it.
Mm.
My problem could be that it creates a belief that, you know what, the lack of addressing urgent things is less important. And then the next 5 years, you get something more radical, more uncontrollable. So the issue of what was called domestic affairs, that's what this grand coalition is. That's for me, if it falls apart, then people can say, oh, well, look, this was always going to go. But for me, the fear is more that it just becomes a compromise of, Mabatu, you and I are not mutually assured destruction. You and I are not going to harm each other to the point of where when we get to elections, I look bad and you look bad.
Mm.
This week, you have a headline from this newspaper and I'll have it from that for me is worse, right? So we shouldn't worry about the falling. The falling would be a natural thing if things really get out of hand. What we should worry about is we both say mutually assured non-destruction.
Mm.
I don't harm you, you don't harm me. We're going to the next 5 years looking good. That for me is more worrisome.
How so?
In the sense that it says, look, if Mabatu and I have an agreement that we're not harming each other, that basically means, look, for the first 2 weeks, you can have the headlines. And then the next 2 weeks, it's my turn. But nothing really gets done because what we're doing is we're having our issue in the newspapers, right? Because the citizens are like, oh my word, this thing better not fall apart. And the private sector says, hey, you guys need to keep it together. You need to keep it together. Meaning, when's the work actually going to get done?
Yeah.
When are we actually going to get to the core issue of, well, I said, I view the state of South Africa to be in crisis. When are we actually going to address the crisis? That's what I'm saying. I don't care about the falling. The falling would be because things have not worked. I care more about we have an agreement that we don't harm each other and that we just keep things stable for the next 5 years. You need to look good for your Western Cape. I need to look good for my constituencies there. Therefore, we never really get to the nitty-gritty of the issue. And I think my other worry is that then it creates, and I think my father touched on this citizenry, right? Look, maybe I'm one of those people, I don't like being boxed in. And I think sometimes citizens, we also have to catch a wake-up call to say, this is partially our fault, the citizens. I used to live in Australia. The lovely thing I loved about Australia was they'd say, mate, if you're not voting, why do we care? And I know people like, oh, I know people, the corners are obviously, you know, these Scottish educated, enlightened people. Oh, everything is great, it's locked at home. No. But the point is to say that there's a reason why in developing countries, it is important to vote. There's a reason
important to do what?
To vote.
Oh,
And to be involved in politics. Because if you abscond, right, and we've seen it, if you abscond, and South Africans have a bad tendency, it's not that people make it seem like, oh my word, the National Party was ruling and people didn't see things were wrong. They saw that things were wrong, but they allowed it to happen. People saw the ANC was messing up, but you know what? I know they'll get better. Mtanam. Don't worry, next time. So my worry is that citizens become very, it's almost like we are forced to do this. I'm like, look, we have to take responsibility. And part of taking responsibility, I think, is a point this Pumla raised, which is to say, and I always raise this when I speak to local government people, is to say, you as a citizen, do you know who your councillor is? And obviously, when's the last time you actually said, look, I always encourage my church to say, listen, invite your councillor for lunch. And say, listen, I'm not here to ask you what you're supposed to do for me. Let's just actually have a conversation as a citizen to citizen. What are you struggling as a councillor? Because we make councillerships and politics to be a black box exercise. I vote, and then something's going to happen in 5 years. And if there's no light, oh well, okay, there's lights, we have ESCOM, thank goodness. But
he wants to say something.
But
you can finish your point and then.
So for me, we also now have to start challenging citizens to say, you need to do more. And this is where I've got an aversion to NGOs. I'm not a fan of NGOs. I believe, like Mugabe says, that they're more like tigers in reality. As in, I don't think we've really had proper NGOs that come from the community in South Africa. Because if that was real, many of the nonsense that we see today would not be happening.
All right.
We just basically, in the same way we say government outsources, we've outsourced it to these very tiny NGOs that have funding from places we don't know. That's why I said citizens also need to say, listen, catch a wake-up call. There's only one South Africa. Unlike other people, we don't have the choice of where to run. The sea is too close for us to run.
All right.
So it's quite correct. Yeah. But you must also tell us that Australia is one of the few countries that have actually experimented with compulsory voting. And because they then experimented with compulsory voting, they've made voting easy. There are voting stations at the beach. You can vote in your Speedo in Australia, because you then have to, so the tension, and I agree, I mean, you've got to problematize the citizens, the voters, whether they are docile, whether they quickly check out or they easily get confused. There are a lot of things that are happening amongst the voters. And one of the things I've picked up in this previous election is just how illiterate people are on the voting system. So new changes get introduced. And again, I'm going to keep going back to how the establishment is tampering with our voting system. So we had an introduction in this election of Section 24A amendment. My submission to the IEC last year, August, was very clear. At every election since 2004, over 1.5 million people vote through Section 24A. You are going to disenfranchise people. They're trying to solve a big problem that they said doesn't exist in 2019, which is double voting. When Aunt Pat and others tried to vote twice using this Section 24A form, because the ink, the indelible ink, you could scratch it off. So in fact, what you had a problem was an ink problem. Now you are then creating a mechanism that is far-reaching. The second part is the ease of voting. Voting stations are far. That's why political parties invest a lot in pick and drop. If you are a comrade on voting day, you must know that your car and your petrol, pay gone. You're going to be picking up the go-go's. I mean, there was somebody who said something earlier, which I want to take them out of their suspense. Ray, online. there is no universe that the ANC claws back any power. The ANC, I can take a bet now, will be a 30% political party in 2029. There's no universe. The GNU helps it, sanitizes it, and so on. What we are failing to accept is how disruptive the 29 May elections have been in the political landscape of South Africa. Because we are focusing on the national picture. Yet here where we are seated in Gauteng, there's actually a very different reality. Panyaza Lesufi has a minority government in place without the DA. The DA votes against him. MK and EFF, who are supposedly the opposition we are talking about, say to him, guaranteed, rest assured, in Gauteng,
Support
you get our vote. It has nothing to do with ideology, with pursuance. It's about interests of political elites. Then you've got another permutation. Action SA says, because they are also supposedly the opposition in parliament, they say, no, we're going to sit in our little corner. We don't care about this arrangement. Guess what? They've nominated the next speaker of the city of Johannesburg, who will be voted into power with the ANC, because in the metros here in Gauteng, they've sort of cut some deal where you may, end up with different, permutations in the city of Tshwane, where the DA mayor is removed by an Action SA. So when we are having these conversations, let's not separate the reality of what is happening in the political landscape. This idea that there's opposition, everybody is bargaining now for their interests. The experiment of the ANC giving us so-called mayors, I don't know what was going on in this city for the last 18 months, where there's just somebody in a position called executive mayor. Doesn't look the part, doesn't act the part, doesn't do the part. He's just there enjoying protection, has the highest security detail of any other executive mayor in this city. So the point is this. We must appreciate what is going on in South African politics. And this idea that MK will collapse, I'm not sure where it comes from. So if you look at the EFF in 2014, there was a Save the EFF faction led by the likes of Mngitama and people with guns. Right? That was chaos. The early days of the EFF were chaotic, but they recovered. So it's about how soon do you recover from the chaos of being a new political party and begin to institutionalize yourself and begin to put the things that make you a political party. From 2014, the EFF grew in 2019. They've now declined. Again, this is the beginning of the end for them. There's no way universe the EFF comes back from this. MK could easily be a 20% party in 2029. And that's a scary thing for people. But lastly, some ANC councillors resign in Umzumbe local municipality in KZN. A wide by-election of about 7 wards takes place in Umzumbe. Those councillors of the ANC, only one wins a ward seat. The ANC retains 2. The rest go to the IFP. Now, the DA is not a feature in that municipality. So we must then ask a question. What happens in 2026 when the so-called GNU partners, because ATM also has presence there, when the ANC and IFP can form a government and they need MK, what becomes the demands of MK on the cabinet of KwaZulu-Natal, where they have 45% of the vote? So one of the things that we've got to accept, which Europeans have accepted, and the poverty of the South African context, is that we have no agreement. I know we talk about the common good. I like talking about public goods. There's no normativity in terms of what are the bare minimum public goods that should be available to South Africans, and you don't tamper with them. So if the Conservative Party doesn't like NHS, they'll never abolish it. They'll just starve it of budget, maybe doctors, and so on and so on. But they're not going to get rid of it. The DA doesn't want a minimum wage. So we need to get to some point of consensus. What becomes part of that? There are people who disagree with free education until the first degree. I agree. So is the NHI the best way for universal healthcare coverage? Or we need another thing? So people say we don't like the NHI. They then don't say what can then replace that thing. So I think my frustration is that we have no consensus on public goods. And then secondly, we have to accept in Europe, there are very far right parties. They're in coalition with far left parties. They're making it work because at least they have an agreement on the basic of what does it mean to live a dignified life.
Okay.
which the constitution guarantees.
Wow. Colleagues, we've been on this for the last hour and 42 minutes, and I thought we were going to be an hour. So I do want us to sort of narrow it down a little bit so that we can get people going home earlier. But it's a really exciting and a very important conversation that we're having right here. Because none of us knows, to answer a question, what's going to happen. And we're trying to grapple with the situation that we are not aware, because unlike 1994, there's a lot that has gone there's a lot of water under this bridge, and a lot of that water is murky, and we can't really use it to see going forward. But there are some certain issues that have come out very clear in my head: the quality of politicians or the representatives of society in parliament. I think it's an important issue. I had a chat with my colleagues some time back to really check who are our politicians, what do they bring to the table, what are their experiences. I think we're doing that work behind the scenes, Mabato and your team, so that we can really understand who is representing us and what is it that they are bringing, what is their quality. And as soon as we do that, we'll put it to the public. The other issue that has come out very, very clearly is that it's not clear, it is in my head from having listened, that the GNU is likely to bring us hope in terms of dealing with the issues that we are worried about as a country for various reasons. A lot of interpolitical issues that are taking place internally, lack of clarity of purpose and all of those kinds of things. Another issue, which is about how do we as communities and citizens hold these guys accountable. These are some of the themes that are coming through in my head. But Mabato, as GGA, we have had, I'm now going to give a chance for people to wrap up. But before we do that, I just want Mabato to just take us through. We've developed 10 points, which we believe as GGA, we need to have them in place at least. I mean, you can use a common good or public, whatever the case may be, that if those things were to be in place, at least it would be a semblance towards this. And Mabato is going to just take us through that in summary, and then I'll just go around the table for people to comment, and then I will also read, just after Mabato speaks, I'll read the last comments, and then we can take it from there.
Right. So the 10 areas of accountability that GGA has identified, the first one is deepening political accountability. I think that I don't have to elaborate on that.
We've spoken at length.
The central theme of today. The second one is fostering greater public engagement. We've outlined that voter turnout continues to be, on the decline due to dissatisfaction with democratic governance. The third one is navigating the coalitions era. Once again, we've elaborately spoken about the various factors that can either make or break, quote unquote, this new political landscape that we find ourselves in. Fourthly, bolstering the civil service. TK has touched based on this, that political immaturity, instability should never come at the expense of the provision of public services. So how do we ensure that it comes at the expense of that? Fifthly, improving local governance outcomes. We've also touched base on that. Far too many local municipalities are on the verge of collapse. What needs to be put in place? What practically needs to be put in place to mitigate the dysfunction within local municipalities, which once again ties in with the experience, ordinary citizens' experience of democratic governance. The seventh point is reconfiguring state-owned enterprises. Corruption and SOEs are often used within the same sentence, and dysfunction seems to be the central theme within these different sectors of society. Another point is unlocking mining and industrial potential. Now, this one is a very hotly contested one, given how hostile the mining sector has proven to be. But how do we untap this underutilized industry? How can we reconfigure it in such a way that it addresses industrial or contributes towards industrialization and contributes towards a developmental state? Addressing peace and security issues in SADC. Lukana touched based on this. South Africa doesn't exist in silo. So how do we also make sure that national objectives and agendas are constructed in a way that is in tune with what's happening regionally? What happens in Zim, what happens in neighboring countries has a direct impact in the functioning of South Africa. The second last point is maintaining credibility in a volatile international environment. Fortunately or unfortunately, South Africa is a developing state. So therefore, whatever happens at an international level has a direct and immediate impact on countries such as South Africa. Unfortunately, fortunately, the first area in which we see this transpire is within economics. So similar to regional dynamics, we also need to foster national policies that are cognizant and in tune with what's happening at an international level. Also making sure that, how do you somewhat keep your international standing and at the same time address local and regional factors which can sometimes conflict with each other. Last point is set an example on climate change. I mean, water scarcity, floods, droughts are a common feature within South Africa. And unfortunately, the disadvantaged are the ones that feel the immediate impact. So how do we also make sure that climate change is not just some airy-fairy word, but making sure that it's part of the central agenda? Because at the heart of all of this thing is the disenfranchised are the ones that have the immediate impact when things go wrong.
All right, those are the 10 points that GGA has put down to say if those things were to be in place or attended to, this government of national unity would have at least done something meaningful to our society. Now we are coming to the end. I'm going to start with you and then come to you and then come to you. If there's still time, I might come to you. We just have 10 more minutes left. But Zanaibu Suleiman Sani says, good governance is supposed to be the end product of democratic government. Unfortunately, it doesn't come directly due to human nature. Human nature is a huge issue. If the masses need it, they can get it by becoming organized. Jevon Jacobs comes back to say urbanism policy also has this theme of diverting power from local municipality, which absorbs national government from accountability. Is a good start not to enforce national government hand to play. We need to separate NGOs from CBOs and faith. I think FBO stands for faith-based organization. They are not all the same thing. If we had time, I had prepared a question which was asking, for an example, the role of NGOs in the area of immigration, in the social media space. People are saying Mutsoaledi was taken to court when he was doing the same thing as the current minister is doing, but he's not being taken to court. Is it because the NGOs are aligned politically or ideologically with the DA, the DA minister? So these are questions that we don't have time to grapple with, but I think they underline the importance of this debate that we're having, because as South Africans, we really are seriously concerned about governance and good governance in South Africa, and one part of good governance is accountability. Now we're making closing remarks. I'll start with you, Doc, and then go that way.
I'm going to phrase it like this.
Yes.
Dear GNU.
Yeah.
Dear Dolly.
Yeah.
So, dear GNU, you have the opportunity to recreate an imaginary of South African politics that we have not yet seen before. So be bold in your pronouncements, but also be bold to allow yourself as individual parties around the table to be questioned. Let the people around the table that you disagree with, that you need for not having mutual self-destruction, but allow them to question, because we want to believe as citizens that you have something that we can still believe in. It's not just about civic accountability. It's also about trust, right? So, dear GNU, give us a reason to trust government. Give us a reason to think about the political realm as something that can actually transform society for the better. And finally, don't just seek an audience with big business as if you need their trust to make this work. Seek an audience and remind yourselves and remind the people around your table that you actually care, that you care enough to debate, that you care enough to work through budgets in a way that doesn't just remind us of the status quo, but can really be a legitimate institution that we can trust, that we can then say, okay, this is doing some good, not just wait to fall apart.
Thank you for those 3 points. TK.
Yeah. For me, one of my favorite institutions in the world is the Chinese Communist Party. And going back to what they said in 1985, Deng Xiaoping said something which was quite important in the rise to China. He said, I can't say it in Chinese. It's hide and abide.
Hide and abide.
Hide and abide your strength.
Yeah.
And the thinking there was stop being so loud and actually get the work done. And within the context of South Africa, look, this would mean 3 things quickly. One, look, you really do need to work on safety. The fact that citizens, and obviously this is Women's Month, but I always say women are a litmus test. If a woman in a country can walk around after 1 o'clock, it's a sign that the country is working. And the fact that it's so normal in South Africa that doesn't happen, work on that. Because it means systems in place and safety security is not in place. That's the first thing. Secondly, infrastructural degradation in South Africa. Coming from the Vaal, it's a horrible experience where I saw an 89-year-old Gogo having to go fetch water because our infrastructure in the Vaal has become so degraded. And this is the case for most South Africans. It's now hitting urban South Africans. And then the third one, which is a bang, if you are going to really do something, is and I'm not going to ask for much because I don't think they can do much. Just these three things.
Your expectations are very.
Is it 257 or 247 municipalities in South Africa is too much? It's too much.
Too much.
Rural municipalities, and someone raised the issue that a lot of what's happened is you expect a municipality in rural South Africa to do what the city of Joburg is supposed to be doing, but you don't give them the same budget. We need to go back and say, listen, in truth, some of the things we're working on at the Wits School of Government is we're actually saying, listen, we actually need about 12 metros, and we need to actually let them work like Singapore. Give them the freedom and ability to really maximize on commerce, right? These other ones should be put under a national trust to be able to say, how can we actually get you up to state? Because what we never discuss is a question of anticipatory government. We're always reacting in South Africa. We never say what comes next. And what I'm saying should come next is, how do we get to the point where we say, listen, the city of Gauteng is never going to build the houses we need. It's just not going to happen. But if we were to fix the Eastern Cape, fix Limpopo, I'm not saying people should, if you come from the Eastern Cape, you should live there. We're not saying, but it should be an issue of saying, if I feel as though things are working at home in the Vaal, do I really need to come to Joburg? Right. And until we give people that optionality, we're ever going to be a state in a crisis. So GNU and citizens, hide and abide. South Africans, let's keep quiet and let's actually just ask for 3 things. And if this doesn't work, there's a political party coming under Lukona Mguni which we're going to vote for.
Your parting shots.
District development model.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's important to make this point. Matala asked a question during his input about, the presence of multi-parties in public institution and what does that do. I think what it does is it introduces a different kind of political competition, and it introduces a cultural shock to some political parties. I was listening to the DA after the president had spoken on the 18th of July. I thought, hey, things change very quickly, man. The kind of, and first of all, John Steenhuisen didn't do his alternative SONA kind of address. So that's already off the table of opposition politics. And then afterwards, they had to come out as ministers to reinforce really what the president was saying. And this is why you then see Helen Zille always trying to start conflict with the ANC, because in her mind, as an astute politician, she's quite aware that the DA could easily disappear in the politics of this arrangement. And therefore, there must be some conflict that reminds people that this is the DA and this is what it fights for. And so I think that kind of political competition is going to be interesting to see and to watch going forward. I mean, we have the highest number of political parties ever represented in the National Assembly at 18. We've got parties toying with ideas of electoral thresholds. If you don't get more than 1%, then you shouldn't be represented in municipalities. In the 18, you'd be left with 7 if you did that in this parliament. So there are things that I think the public has to really have an appetite about the architecture of the state. Because what is coming now silently through various forms of legislation are mechanisms that actually weaken our democracy rather than strengthen our democracy. It's like people believing the two-pot system strengthens their finances when it actually weakens their finances. So we've got to go back to a point where we find ways to make the public literate on what is the state, how does the state function. And I mean, I think we've all failed. Those of us who've lectured in political science and governance, some of our students are corrupt. Government, they don't do their work.
Right.
They are in it is such high ineptitude. So we've got to also rethink our mechanisms of training and educating, because I think we are failing. We are really failing. I mean, a number of these politicians pride themselves. I got a certificate in the parliamentary program that is run at WITS. But really the point is we need to think carefully when we talk about this people's power, this idea of, you know, people coming back to the state. I mean, the fact that we are saying, let's take examples from the 1980s, tells me we've completely regressed. We can't be back in the 80s. You can't tell me that the thing that I'm fighting for today, my 3-year-old boy, in 25 years' time, he must still be wondering, where is good governance? Where is this? We have allowed a country that limits the imagination of our citizens, which is why when you make policy propositions, people say government is corrupt. But you can't judge imagination through the failures and constraints of the ANC, because we've made the ANC the universe of this country. And I think going forward, we've got to start interrogating some of those areas, like Mabato is saying. I mean, mining and industrialization. I mean, as in Limpopo, talking there when the premier was opening the parliament, she's big on this beneficiation. So, but everybody has been talking about beneficiation. But part of the problem with beneficiation is circumvented by bilateral agreements that we have with different countries. You can't put up a smelter here if you have a bilateral agreement with another country like China that you will export. So we've got to rethink. So people tend to think piecemeal. We've got to start having an understanding of the holistic environment, geopolitically and domestic affairs, Ellie, if I was to put it that way.
All right. Mabato?
I'll keep it short.
Keep
I
it
just
short,
say that at the heart of it, democracy is meant to be for and by the people. And the moment democracy leaves the people behind, the government, the state will be punished for it. And we have to think long-term wise, what does this mean for the state of South Africa? Where we at right now is a blank page, but a blank page that is very much stained, but it also provides an opportunity for political imagination and strategy. There is hope, there is possibility, but that needs to be accompanied by political will, and I'll use that term again, political imagination, of which that's a whole nother conversation.
Sure. Wow, what a great conversation we've had both here by the, let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you said and your input, your preparation to come, but also those of you who are here live, thank you so much also for coming, and those online. We appreciate. We didn't get to discuss, for example, the media, the role of the media, and the media has been decimated, the newsrooms and all of that, and but they've played a big role in the country historically in bringing out some of the governance mishaps and so on. We didn't have the chance to talk about them. We didn't have the chance to talk about civil society in depth. You know, I'm sure there are so many areas that we could have entered into. We didn't talk so much about the community, but we said enough to show that the communities still need to be engaged and empowered to be able to take government to account. GGA has a theory of change that has got two elements: government effectiveness and an empowered society. And if you don't have those kinds of things, you're gonna a big problem. And so these events, these webinars that we do are intended to engender a conversation beyond this time, a conversation in the homes, in the offices, wherever we are, so that people can talk. And the thing I like about us, South Africans at least, we're engaged people. We are engaged in terms of what's taking place in our country. You just watch what happens on Twitter and social media. People are engaged. People want to say something. And I think we need to take that engagement and make it meaningful in a way that changes the lives of people. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much to the Mail and Guardian. Thank you so much to everyone who made this possible. Thanks to the colleagues here at GGA, and also to everyone who's here and at home. And thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Until the next time. Thank you.
Thank you for being a lovely host.
Thank you.